Great. Okay, so I'm here to talk about homeless culture. Now, I'm going to give you a handout which will have a website which gets into a lot of details of homeless culture, especially Portland homeless culture. But I'm actually today, because we've got a limited amount of time, we're actually going to talk about some of the basis of homeless culture and how that ends up building what we see on the street. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the background and then some of the details that we see. So first thing I want to ask you guys is, what is it that causes homelessness? What are the kinds of things that cause people to be homeless?
Lack of affordable housing.
Okay, lack of affordable housing, that's definitely an issue.
Broken relationships.
I'm sorry?
Broken relationships.
Broken relationships, excellent.
Yep, mental illness and not having access to good care.
Not having good access to mental health services. The fact that there's not enough mental health services to go around for everybody that's out there, right? Yeah. What else?
Could be a history of any crime, like in the sense of being stuck in that situation of not being able to get a job or housing after being in jail.
So like if you're in prison
Yeah.
and then you've got a felony on your record and then it's difficult
Yeah.
difficult to get work,
Yeah.
difficult to find an apartment,
Mm-hmm.
all of that kind of stuff. By the way, I just found out that in New York they have a bakery, and all they do, they set up the bakery so they can hire felons, and they hire more than 100 felons, and those are the people who do the brownies for Ben and Jerry's. So support your local felon, or support the felons in New York, and buy Ben and Jerry's brownie ice cream. Okay.
There's no place in Los Angeles, G-Dog Ministry.
Yeah, no, I've heard about them. They're great, but they're not connected to Ben and Jerry's. So, but that's more important. Okay, so all of these things, and then a lot of people will also say addiction. That addiction can cause homelessness. The thing about mental illness, I just want to talk about mental illness for a little bit, is that only about 35% of the folks on the street are actually diagnosed with mental illness, which means the majority of people aren't. Now, of course, that statistic is kind of meaningless because the point of that is how many are diagnosed. Well, how many people on the street are diagnosed with anything? You know, when they have something. So that's a difficult thing. But when they do surveys of the street and they talk about addiction, approximately 40% of the people on the street are addicted to some substance. Once again, that means 60% of the people out there are not. They've got other issues and all of that, but that's not, these things can't be called the cause of homelessness because less than 50% of the people are actually afflicted with it. So there is one thing that all homeless people, that no matter what, every single homeless person has, and that is a lack of a support network. Because the reason most people aren't homeless is because they have family and friends that will take them in. So the people who are homeless, those are the ones who don't have family or friends to take them in. Now there's any number of reasons why they wouldn't. It could be because a person is too ashamed to ask. It could be that there's you talked about broken relationships, it could be because there's broken relationships with the family. It could be because they moved to a new area and so they don't have the connections in the new area there's any number of reasons why they might not have that. But no matter what, there is the one thing that all homeless people have in common is that separation from other people, that disconnect, and that you've got nobody around who's going to help them in their time of need. Both myself and both of my brothers, we would have ended up on the street, except that my father took us in and helped us get through the rough patches in our lives. And probably most of you guys would have had the same experience. You probably would have ended up in the street, except that somebody helped you out, whether it be a friend or a family or whatever. But homeless folks don't. They don't have anybody. So the number one cause of homelessness is actually a lack of a support network. Okay, so, and then once a person becomes homeless, then they end up in a different category. I'm going to talk about a sociologist. Her name is Dr. Susan Fiske. Once again, on the handout that I give out, I'm going to give a link to a lecture that she gave, which is the background to what I'm talking about here. You can also find it in her book, Envy Up, Scorn Down. Anyway, but there's a sociologist named Dr. Susan Fiske, and what she and her colleagues did is got a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of Americans, all different kinds of ages and social contexts, and they put them all on an MRI, because that's what scientists do. And then they would flash pictures or give descriptions of certain kinds of people, different kinds of sociological groups. And so, for instance, they would put a person who is clearly rich, who is clearly very well off, and the section of the brain that lit up when most people see a well-off person is envy. Oh, I wish I had that kind of money. Oh, I wish I had that kind of dress, you know. And so people would be envious of those who would be wealthy, professional, like a doctor or something. Then there's other people they would look at and they would say, oh, there's a person who's just like me, a housewife or whatever, and that person is on the same level as me. And that would light up a different part of the brain. Then there's other people that they would see. They'd see maybe somebody who's physically handicapped in a wheelchair, and the part of the brain that would light up would be pity. So if you see a poor kid in Africa, then you feel pity for them, and you feel like, gosh, I really wish I could do something for them, that kind of thing. And then they had other groups of people, and that they would show, and that would light up in their brain an instant response of disgust. So, for instance, people who are undocumented immigrants, people who are, welfare moms, that kind of thing. And also, interestingly enough, Turkish people. Why Turkish people? There's nothing wrong with Turkish people. I don't know. Anyway, that was just one of the things that they found out. Science is always interesting sometimes. Anyway, and then she said, however, there was one group that she couldn't put in the chart because there was a nice chart that had the 4 sections, and she said that in this chart, we would put all the social groups in this chart. She says all of them except one. Because the reaction to this one group was so strong that if they put them in the chart, the whole chart would be skewed. And so she said the one group that was completely different, that she couldn't fit in the chart of normal reaction, was the homeless. She says the instant emotional response to the homeless was so widespread and so strong of disgust that they had to go outside the chart. They had that one group, the one instant emotional response was so strong, it was instant disgust. And she said that the fact that it's so strong, it means that the majority of Americans, the instant that they see a homeless person, they do not see a human being, they see a pile of garbage. And if you think about it, if most people, when they look at a homeless person, that doesn't mean that every single person, when they look at a homeless person, they're going to treat them like a pile of garbage. It just means that's the initial emotional response. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, I can't treat them like garbage. You know, that wouldn't be right. That would make me look bad or something like that. And so most people don't. Or, oh, wow, I can't be mean to this homeless person. And so a lot of people will look at homeless people, feel the disgust that is normal, a normal reaction for an American, and they ignore them. I don't want to deal with that. I just don't want to look at them. Other people will feel completely free to just respond in the disgust that they feel. So what does that mean for them is that they feel disgust toward them, they get that instant emotional response, and then they come up with a reason afterward why they are disgusted. Oh, this person needs to get a job. This person is lazy. Look how dirty this person is. Oh, this person is a drug addict. All of these reasons come after the discussed response. This is the way that we all do emotions. We usually feel emotion and then we come up with a reason for an emotion afterward. Okay, so if the majority of Americans feel disgust toward homeless people and then they come up with reasons afterward, then what happens? Let's say that a homeless person comes wandering into your neighborhood and you're just like, oh my goodness, it's a homeless person. I feel disgust. Well, if I feel disgust, then I'm a little bit afraid of them. I need to deal with that. So you're going to call the city or you're going to call the police and say, I need this person out of my neighborhood. And pretty soon you have a lot of people doing that. Why? Because the majority response of Americans toward homeless is disgust. And pretty soon you're going to get people on bicycles riding by homeless camps saying, oh, look at these disgusting homeless people, and they're crouching into our bike area. Well, we need to get rid of these people. And they're going to call the police, and they're going to call the city, and they're going to say, well, we need to move these people out of here. And the city responds to all of the calls, and they say, well, and once again, they're not thinking about this. They're not processing. They come back with an initial disgust response, which is that these people are piles of garbage, and so we're going to treat them like piles of garbage. So we're going to move them out of the way. Because that's how you treat a pile of garbage. You move it. You move it somewhere else, so that way it's out of sight. Piles of garbage just need to be gotten rid of. We don't have to house them because they're not really people. They're piles of garbage. So we're just going to move them. We're just going to get them out of the way. All right, and then after that, then at the end of that line comes the police. The police, maybe some of them will respond to homeless people like piles of garbage and some of them won't. But they are told by the city and by the community who sees the homeless as piles of garbage and say, you guys need to take care of this now. And the police do the best they can. We shouldn't be blaming the police for their actions to the homeless because it's actually from the city and from the community. And it starts with local communities and local neighbors disgusted at the homeless, and that ends up with a police officer taking the homeless bedding, the stuff that they use to survive, throwing it away and getting rid of it. Because ultimately, it isn't just the tents and the blankets that they see as garbage, it's the people. The thing that's most sad about this is that it isn't just the police or the city or the communities, the neighbors who live in houses who see the homeless as disgusting. Also, the homeless see themselves as disgusting. They see each other as disgusting. And they will be mad at each other. They will be disgusted at some of the things that each other does. And they'll be assuming that somebody else is being disrespectful because they're already operating on the idea that anyone on the street is disgusting. And of course, they feel that about their own person as well. As soon as a person gets on the street, they're partly afraid because they're completely vulnerable, but they're also completely disgusted with themselves because there's something they had to do to get to this place. Almost everybody that I've talked to, every homeless person I've talked to at one point said to themselves, oh, I will never be homeless. I'm never going to end up in that situation. You never find me there. And of course, all homeless people end up in that situation. They don't want to be in that situation because they think of themselves as a good person. They're a good person, so of course they're not going to end up on the street. And good people don't end up on the street. And so as soon as they end up on the street, they're no longer a good person. They're a disgusting person. They're a pile of garbage. And suddenly they're thrown in with a bunch of people who are also piles of garbage. And that's the beginning of homeless culture. That's the starting point in which all of society and you yourself and the people around you think of you as a pile of garbage. You're going to start building things up from there. Of course, and so the first thing that happens when you become homeless is you get treated like a criminal. And so because as soon as you're homeless, then you become one of those other people. You become a person who's no longer fit for society, so therefore you are a criminal. You're treated like a criminal whether you've done any criminal act or not. Eventually, if you get treated like a criminal enough, you'll realize it doesn't matter if I do a criminal activity. It doesn't matter if I spray paint on somebody's wall. It doesn't matter if I urinate in over there. It doesn't matter if I pile up garbage. It doesn't matter if I steal some food or steal a bike from the local store, because I'm already being punished. Why not go ahead and act like a criminal since I'm being treated like a criminal? And so there's some criminal activity that happens specifically because they're already in that place. You might as well. And because of the disgust that people feel about themselves, they feel like, well, I'm not going to be any worse of a person because of that. That's the first building block of homeless culture, is the disgust that everybody thinks of them. The other building block is just the stress. Probably the one real difference between homeless people and, quote, normal people, whatever normal is first there's the assumption that the social box that people are put in, the disgust box, and then the other thing is the stress level. Okay, the very first thing that homeless people have trouble with is sleep. That is the first primary thing. Okay, so what are some of the results of sleep deprivation? Stress.
Become agitated easily.
I'm sorry?
You become agitated easily.
Become agitated easily, get irritated. Sure, yeah. What else?
I can't function properly.
Can't function
Like
properly.
I just
Yeah.
can't think straight or
Right, and in fact,
do
actually,
normal tasks.
and in fact, actually, they've done studies to show that if we go without one night of sleep, then we are the same as a
Yeah.
person with high alcohol level. We function, and our response time is on that same kind of level. So remember that next time that you don't get enough sleep, think about, well, maybe I shouldn't be driving because I'm basically a drunk driver here. And but think about the homeless. The homeless, they don't have sleep night after night after night after night. You know, how often does a homeless person get a good night's sleep? How often does a homeless person have to actually skip sleep? Because maybe it's too cold to sleep at night, or maybe they don't feel safe. The first few nights that somebody becomes homeless, they don't usually sleep at all. The times that I ended up on the street trying to sleep, maybe I slept an hour. But most of the time you're just up because you're just like, is a policeman gonna harass me? Is somebody gonna bother me? You just don't know. And so that's a great introduction there. And the fact is that you do get harassed because of the disgust factor. You go down the community and there's people who are angry at you and you don't even know why. There's people who, but it isn't even just open anger, because that doesn't happen all the time. Only every once in a while. Even if you're holding even if you're a panhandler, it doesn't happen all the time. But a lot of times it's just people avoiding you. Not feeling like you're really a part of the community. You're not really involved at all because people just don't want to have anything to do with you. You don't have to be doing anything. You could just be sitting there, but people want to avoid you. And then, of course, if you happen to be sitting in the wrong place, like maybe too close to somebody's family or something like that, then they're going to tell you to move. Or maybe they'll call the police, and the police will say, well, I'm sorry, you can't be in here. Well, why can't I be in here? Well, because this is a place for families, and you shouldn't be next to families. I have one person, one of my friends, he said that that he became homeless because he lost his job and ended up on the street, but he was going to stay clean, sober. He'd been sober for a long time, and he was doing the best he can. He was helping people as best he could. And at one point he was in a park and he saw his sister and her kids. They were there and they were playing in the park. And he's like, oh, great. I haven't seen my sister in forever. I haven't seen her for years. And so he comes up and approaches her and she looks up and she recognizes him. And he says, hi. And then she goes, picks up her kids, and they go in the car and drive away. Because as soon as he became homeless, he became somebody that they didn't want to talk to anymore. Hasn't ever talked to her since. Hasn't ever talked to him since, even though he's not homeless anymore. And so it is that harassment? Not exactly. It's being socially ostracized. It's just saying, you are no longer a part of us. You don't belong. You don't fit in. And so once again, that adds a lot of stress. When yeah.
You know, you were talking about like the way the homeless view themselves too. Like one of my friends became homeless years ago. He had heroin addiction, and he had seen me just walking on the street, and he chose to avoid me, not because he didn't want to talk to me, it's just because he didn't want me to see him.
Right. Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the major characteristics of being homeless is isolation. It's interesting that Mother Teresa's group Missionaries of Charity, they came to San Diego and they were connected with different homeless groups in San Diego. So they were working with lepers in India and other groups like that. But when they came to the United States, they said, well, we're going to work with the homeless. So they came to San Diego, and after a couple of years of working with the homeless, they said, well, you know, in India, of course, there's many health problems, and people on the street have they need food and they need water. And they said, but out here in the United States, the poorest people that we have in the United States, their number one need is human connection. Because the main thing that they're lacking or the main thing that happens for them is isolation. And they said, we can't really say that those who live in poverty in the third world are worse off than the people here, because at least people in poverty in the third world have community. They're a part of the whole thing. They're at the bottom rung, but they're still a part of society. The homeless aren't even a part. They're not even considered a part of society. Stress levels are also high from the homeless because they get their stuff stolen all the time. Their stuff gets stolen so often that if they misplace something, they first assume that it's stolen. This happens all the time. Oh, my stuff got stolen and all that. Okay, well, where's the last place you put it? Well, we put it right over here. Well, it turned out somebody just moved it. Nobody stole it. It just moved. But it happens so often. You know, people's bikes, people's tents, people's blankets, their personal items, their IDs. It gets stolen. This kinds of things get stolen all the time. And once again, it's just because it's out in the open. Some people think that they need it, or they think they're going to get something out of it. The other thing is that, of course, homeless people have great need. And a lot of times they don't even know what the need is. Sometimes they're depressed. Sometimes they're struggling with things. Sometimes they just need to walk a few miles to get some food, and that's hard after a while. Some folks don't have adequate bedding or protection from the weather. Some people need more help, and even right now with all the health coverage that's available for folks on the street, which is wonderful, that's out there, but most homeless people don't take full advantage of that, and then they still have issues like abscessed teeth and other things that maybe don't always get fixed. There's lots of needs, and if you happen to have a day in which, let's say, you didn't eat enough, or you didn't get enough sleep, or something happens, how do you end up feeling? If you just say, well, I didn't get enough, or you just didn't get enough rest that day, and then somebody comes up and starts talking to you, and somebody talking to you is the last thing that you need. How do you feel?
Annoyed.
Annoyed. I'll bet more than that. I bet it actually heads toward anger. You get angry, and it's not somebody else's fault. If you go up to somebody and you are starving and you say, can I just get a sandwich? You say, oh, I'm sorry, these sandwiches are reserved for something else. You're going to get very, very angry at them. It's not their fault. They're just doing the best they can. They're trying to follow the rules. But when you're starving, it doesn't matter. You're furious at them. When you're isolated and somebody is just avoiding you, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter that it's not really their responsibility to spend time with you. You're still angry. And a lot of homeless folks we see them as being irrational. They're not irrational. They're normally responding to deep need. And so being homeless has this really high stress. Now, let me ask you another question. What are some of the symptoms of chronic stress? Assuming, because all homeless people, every single one has chronic stress. Because everyone has got different issues. If nothing else, the lack of sleep would do it. But there's all these other things as well. What ends up happening with chronic stress? What's some of the symptoms?
Go for it.
It breaks down your immune system.
It breaks down your immune system. Everybody always says that, and it's funny because most homeless people have a really good immune system. How many homeless people get colds? Not very many. And the reason is because when you're on the street, you have this high level of adrenaline, which builds up your immune system. So it kind of balances that part out. What else? What else is an issue with chronic stress?
Self-medication.
Exactly, self-medication. Most homeless people do not start out with addiction. They end up with addiction because of a response to the stress. They're trying to cover up the stress. They're trying to cover up the stress responses with alcohol or drugs. And a lot of homeless people, once they get out of the stress, then they give up the addiction because they don't need it anymore. Okay, so what else? What else is an issue with chronic stress? Well, I have some. One of the issues with chronic stress is loss of memory. When you're stressed day after day after day, you lose the ability to retain memory, to remember things. And so if you spend a lot of time with folks on the street, you see that. People can't, oh, did I say that? Oh, I don't remember. I didn't remember. There's all these things that happen. And we all, all of us who are getting a little older, we all have a loss of memory, but everyone on the street has this, and it's worse than usual. Another thing that's really interesting about chronic stress is muscle fatigue. Because when you're stressed all the time, your muscles tense up over a long period of time. If you're stressed a lot, you tense up a lot. And so you end up with pains that you didn't even know, you don't know where they came from. You end up with all this pain. You end up with headaches all the time. And you don't know why you have the headaches all of a sudden. And it's because of stress. So self-medication. Also, when a person has chronic stress, every single one of us has got, we'll call them quirks, mental quirks for us. Little things that make us eccentric, and that makes us fun. Okay, but if you have chronic stress, then you take those little eccentricities or quirks that we have, and it becomes a full-on mental imbalance. So for instance, I have a thing where I don't like calling someone on the phone who's a stranger. It's just a little thing, and it's not that big of a deal, and I can overcome it most of the time. But for people who are dealing with chronic stress, that little quirk would turn into a full-blown social anxiety. Because I'm stressed all the time and I can't deal with anybody. So a little quirk turns into a big issue once you have chronic stress. Even just living on adrenaline all the time, the way that all homeless people have to, because there's all this kind of drama on the street, lots of exciting drama. When you're living in adrenaline all the time, you end up becoming addicted to the adrenaline. When you end up in housing afterwards, you go through withdrawals, just like any other drug. And you end up getting sick, or you get depressed, or you end up, other issues end up happening. Another thing that happens with chronic stress is dietary changes. You lose your appetite. Just talking about this with some homeless people recently, they said, oh yeah, sometimes I just don't need to eat. I just don't feel the desire to eat. There's no reason to. And so if you don't feel like eating, why should you walk the few miles to get to the closest meal? Why don't you just skip it for today? And after a while, when you make that choice, then for a number of times, then you're going to end up with malnutrition. So now I've talked about all these building blocks, but see, in the midst of all this, there are certain things that we can see that are built into homeless culture. Homeless culture takes a look at people who use drugs and they say, well, people do that. A lot of other people say, drugs, that's horrible. We shouldn't ever be doing that. But folks on the street, they just go, oh, well, people do that. Folks on the street definitely don't like needles laying around. They think that's horrible. But as far as people using, well, people use, people drink. You just can't blame them for that. So that happens. The fact that a lot of homeless people deal with anger issues. That makes sense because they got the chronic stress and they feel harassed and put upon. A lot of homeless people end up in their own communities instead of connecting with other communities. In fact, there's a huge lack of trust of housed people in general, especially police, that makes sense, but also housed people in general. They'll meet a new housed person and it takes time to build up trust. The reason is because you don't know whether that person is trying to take advantage of you or whether that person is going to end up turning on you in the end, because it's happened so many times to them. The fact that so many homeless people do a lot of misdemeanors. No question, now we understand why, because they're already treated like criminals. And so it makes sense that they're going to go that direction if they think that they can get something that they need from it. But there's certain things about homeless culture that some of this isn't indicated by. For instance, the homeless culture, the homeless community. Let me start that sentence again. The homeless community is very caring for each other. Whenever they see somebody in need, they will literally take the shirt off their backs and give it to someone who needs it. They will find whatever way to meet the needs of somebody else. And a lot of times that's because they know the feeling of the need. They know what it is to feel that. And so they want to give toward that. There's one gentleman, and we call him Diver, because he is the most amazing dumpster diver ever. He is fantastic. And so he one time saw one of our homeless community in Gresham, saw her sitting next to a transformer, one of those transformer boxes. And it was a winter night, and the wind from the gorge was coming in, and she was freezing. And he noticed that she had no coat, she had no shoes, she had no socks. And she's just sitting next to this transformer, shivering, trying to get as much heat as she can from the metal box. and he comes by and he says, "Wow, it looks like you're really freezing." She says, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Well, just wait here for a minute." And he runs off and he goes into 3 dumpsters and he finds socks and shoes and a coat and brings them back to her. And a blanket, and brings them back to her, so that way she was able to make it through the night. That's the kind of community that a guy just riding by, he's got his own problems, he's got his own issues, but he's going to go out of his way to make sure that somebody else is going to get taken care of. And that's the way the homeless community works. The homeless community work together to meet everyone's needs. If there's something that's good for one person, then a lot of times they will let other people know, "Hey, you should come over here," and they'll help you over here. They'll let them know, because that's the way the community works. Nobody survives on the street unless everybody helps each other. Because one day I've got a resource, maybe I've got some extra food or whatever, and I'm going to share that with you today, because in another month it may be the other way around, and I'm going to need something from you. And so they work that way. Just a couple other things. Folks on the street end up using their resources right away because they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And they trust that tomorrow will meet the needs for tomorrow. So whatever it is that they have today, they're going to use it. Everything they've got, they're going to use. So if they got in a whole bunch of food, they may eat a lot of food that night, because tomorrow's another day. And they're not going to worry too much about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was, for my church, part of the Village Support Network, where we help a homeless family. And one of the things we were trained, and we actually saw it too, is we were told, it's like, a lot of homeless families, when they finally get stable and into housing, and if they get a little bit of money, they'll just like splurge.
Right.
Because they've got the money
Right
now.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, actually, I don't know if you heard, but Oprah one time decided to do an experiment. And on her show, when she had a show, she had somebody pick a homeless person at random on the street, pick them up and just say, "Okay, come on in." And she gave this homeless person $100,000. $100,000. Said, "Okay, here's $100,000, and here's a financial manager and an accountant. They'll do whatever you say, and they'll advise you about how best to spend your money." And so he took that $100,000 and immediately went out and bought cars for all his friends, because that made all of his friends one step up on the social ladder. Instead of sleeping on the street, they can all sleep in cars. Now, Oprah said this, "See, that proves that homeless people are foolish with their money." But he wasn't foolish. He was really smart and caring on the level that he was at. He said, they're saying, "Well, you ignored the fine. You could have gotten an apartment and all that." Yeah, if he was completely selfish and was only going to spend it on himself. Instead, what he did is he was able to use that and help a lot of other friends to be up on the level that he got, to share in the blessing that he received. Only other thing that I want to mention as far as homeless culture is respect for hard work. Folks on the street really respect hard work. Sometimes you say, "Well, it doesn't seem like they do a lot of hard work." Well, honestly, a lot of folks on the street do hard work. It is really hard work to get up at 5 in the morning, hit the dumpster so you can go canning, so you can have enough money at the end of the day to be able to get the food and the smokes and the beer that you need. They work really hard. They work much harder for the money that they get and for the services that they get than anybody else does for much larger salaries. They really respect hard work, and in fact, actually, if we give homeless folks opportunities, leadership opportunities or service opportunities, they will take it and they will appreciate it. They will respect you more by giving them an opportunity to be a part of the community, because that's the big deal, is to be a part of the broader community. That's the way to solve homelessness, is to have housed people and homeless people build a community of trust where they can trust each other, support each other, and lift each other up. And then they're going to be able to make the next step of getting housing or whatever. But as long as they don't trust anybody, as long as they are put down, as long as they are ashamed for who they are, then it doesn't matter what else you give them, they're still going to be bums. Only when we give them respect and trust and help and support them in their times of gravest need, we get a network of people to support them in the times of their gravest need, that's going to help them up, and that's going to be the next step, so that way they can make the other steps. It'll reduce their stress. A place like Night Strike or a day shelter like what we have out in Gresham, those provide places where they can release their stress. They don't have to be stressed. They can relax for a little bit. And just because they don't have that stress for a little while, then they can process. They can get some of their memory back and get some of their thinking back, so that way they can figure out what they need to do to improve their lives. As long as it's stress all the time, 24/7, they're never going to do anything to improve their lives because they can't. All they can do is survive for today.